Hi, my name is Blake Bettner, a managing editor of Worn & Wound. Today we are talking about the Ulysse Nardin Freak X. Joining me to help decipher this watch is Mr. Vincent Robert. You are a watchmaker. I'll let you explain your position or what you do.
So I am a watchmaker. You probably can tell a little bit. I'm not born under those skies. Yes, okay. I am. I'm from Switzerland, so I went to school in Switzerland. Okay. And long story short, I give you the short stories. Sure. I worked for several brands, but eventually stepped foot into education, and now I really look into education. And I focus on training professionals and also sharing watchmaking classes.
Amateurs. That's actually how we met some years ago at a traveling education class with through the HSNY.
Absolutely right.
Which you direct, which is fabulous. If you haven't taken one of these, by the way, definitely look them up. You should take one if they're in your area. Vincent, thank you for joining us today. We've got a pretty interesting watch in front of us. It's the Ulysse Nardin Freak. So this is a watch that, as the name might imply, kind of entered this world as a strange thing. It was a novel concept back when it was introduced. It had the whole going train kind of sitting on top of the main spring and kind of visible in the minute hand structure. This deviates a little bit from that. This is kind of a distillation of the Freak. This is the Freak X, more specifically. This has a more conventional movement with the Freak mechanism, I guess you could say. It's integrated into the base plate, though, with the going train underneath. Tell us about your thoughts on this watch, the concept of the Freak, and how you feel about its execution in the Freak X.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about the Freak, I think. For those who have been perhaps following watchmaking a while back, I believe the first Freak came out in 2001, right?
Yeah.
So now 2001, we're talking perhaps the early days of horology, because it was not a thing before that. I think Ulysse Nardin was probably one of the first to come up with crazy watches out there. Perhaps you remember the Trilogy of Time?
Yes, yeah, the Trilogy of Time. And they were using exotic materials very early on as well in some of these watches.
So today, unfortunately, I think it flies a bit under the radar. Yeah. And the Freak did not. Yeah. When it came out.
True. Yeah.
Just from the name, it did not. But what was so amazing, I think, for me as a watchmaker for the Freak is the execution of it by bringing essentially the gear train on top of a rotating platform to be visible and to give you the time and mimic somewhat the tourbillon, plus other things such as winding from the back cover or adjusting the time from the bezel. These were all mechanics that were well thought through.
Yeah, yeah, and you said something interesting there about mimicking a tourbillon. So this watch, this Freak X, has an Orbital Escapement. It is making a rotation around the dial you know, every hour. Is this a tourbillon?
Now, that's a good question. I think anyone listening today is probably going to have a 50-50 on who agrees and who disagrees on that.
Sure, okay.
If you ask the industry, probably going to have the same ratios.
Oh, really? Okay.
I would think so. Yeah, there are disagreement on what is a tourbillon and a carousel, even within the industry with specialists.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, I have my views. Personally, I will not call it a tourbillon.
You would not call it a tourbillon?
I will not call it a tourbillon. I actually personally find this more complex than a tourbillon. While it gives you some kind of the same results as in putting your balance and escape into rotation on itself, the mechanics of it are quite more developed. I personally will call it, beyond the Freak, I will call it an orbital oscillator.
Orbital oscillator, okay, interesting. So it looks very cool, right? It's suspended over the movement. It's moving around the dial throughout the hour. Very dramatic. Is there any practical benefits to this, or is it purely like an aesthetical, engineering marvel that we can enjoy and appreciate?
I mean, you have both in the same package here, really. The obvious reason here is that mechanically it's beautiful. You look at it and it's really catching your attention. If you have on the wrists every day, I'm sure you will never get bored of looking at this. Now, in terms of advantage in chronometry, in theory you would. I mean, in theory you would, just like a tourbillon will give you an advantage in some regards, because it will put your balance in several positions here within an hour. So it will create an average of your vertical position, hence in a longer cycle than a tourbillon. right?
Okay.
Now, perhaps most of the advantage here really resides on the material they've been using, with silicone balance, silicone hairspring, silicone escapements, so high-tech materials that creates some sort of advantage.
Yeah, certainly. It has a very interesting, non-traditional looking hairspring, at least from what I noticed. And they've got these self-regulating micro blades in there. There's a lot of kind of interesting tech happening kind of in and around the escapement group here. And it's stabilizing the amplitude and things like this.
Are you talking about the oscillating weight, or
Well,
the name that was given to them?
These micro blades.
The microblades.
Yeah.
All right. So perhaps we should talk about the balance here. Now, when it's moving, it's actually pretty amazing visually, because you have the color, the purple color of the silicon that kind of disappear in the background, because the entire watch has the same kind of color. And then you have those microblades, which I believe are nickel, all right? And they're kept in that original color, so it has this white silvery look. And so when the entire thing spins, you can see that it creates this kind of a halos, or I'm not sure how you mentioned that. So it's a pretty visually pretty cool effect. Now, technically, one of the claims that I hear is that those microblades create friction and help self-regulating the regulating organ through this air friction.
Yeah.
Now, what you have to see is that one of the things with silicon, for all these advantages, a disadvantage of silicon is that you cannot work with several planes or several heights. It has to be one thickness and you cut out of it.
Yeah.
So the balance here needs a rim on the outside to have some weight to create inertia for this balance to oscillate at the amplitude that we want.
Like any variable inertial balance that we see in other watches as well.
Yeah, it's going to need to have some weight on the outskirt of the balance. Now, silicon is very light, otherwise it won't have enough strength to create its own amplitude, right? So hence the addition of those weights in there. Now here, instead of putting perhaps just a complete rim, they put different weights. And so the air will travel in between the weights as the balance circulates into it, creating the air friction.
Yeah.
So I believe this is where it's coming from. Personally, I'm not sure if it really help a lot in the regulation, because I can, how much air friction is in there against the actual tension of the hairspring. So to our friend Ulysse Nardin, I would love to come and see it with your watchmakers and on the timing machine. That would be awesome. Yeah. Now, what though really catches my attention, as you mentioned, is the shape of the hairspring. Now here it's moving, so we can't really see it, but what really caught my attention is the shape of the external curve of the hairspring. Well, usually this is a free sprung balance. That means you're going to have only one single attachment for the hairspring, and usually the external curve that come out of these attachments just perhaps do half a circle length. But here, if you look at it closely, it goes out, in and out again before it actually become to be the actually spears of the spiral hairspring. And so to me, what's interesting here, and again, I'd love to have answers from Ulysse Nardin on this one, is that this is as close as it could be from an overcoil, but being on the same plane, flat. Getting a Breguet overcoil effect. Without the... That's what I suspect from looking at it. And the idea is to avoid, every time the hairspring opens and closes, it actually pushes the balance one way or the other and creating frictions on its pivot. And the overcoil, the idea is that it deploys the hairspring uniformly and avoid extra friction when it deploys. And it feels like these curves actually kind of do the same thing. So that is catching my attention quite a bit. So this watch is actually modeled, the design on one of the slightly higher end versions of the Freak called the Freak Vision, which does have the whole train in that kind of minute arm there. It doesn't have all of that, but I feel like there's a lot of tech packed into here. This is about $50,000 cheaper, maybe more than that watch. This is around $25,000. I think there's a lot of interesting features at that price point that we don't see in many watches in this price point, I guess, when it comes to the considerations that we see here, particularly as they're displayed on the dial and things that you've kind of that you've walked us through.
where do you put this in terms of like other watches? Like, how do you think about this watch in this price range?
The thing is that the Freak kind of created its own line in itself.
Yeah.
It's hard to put it against something else out there because of its history. I mean, it's been out there for almost 20 years, making it a classic almost.
Yeah.
It's still using new materials in there. I like to compare it to the other Freaks because, of course, this watch took away with some features that were very interesting in the original Freak, which is adjusting the time from the bezel, for instance, or the winding from the back cover. But it also makes a lot of sense in terms of wearability, because I believe the movement is slightly smaller. Because of getting rid of those two main features, they could actually use a base movement that exists, bring in the crown.
Yeah, the UN 118, I think, is the base movement. I think this is called the 230, but it's kind of based on that. So yeah, it brings some ergonomical features, maybe like a crown that we understand how to use, and it's a little easier to manipulate.
And some parts that are actually also being used with other calibers, so making it also easier to produce and also helping bringing down the cost of all this. But I wouldn't call it a cheaper version of the Freak. That's not where I see it. To me, it's a very smart watch because it actually keeps the essence and perhaps making way with the extra technical features. So a highly wearable watch, probably also more reliable in many ways for day-to-day wearing.
Sure.
Because here you have now also, they've taken out a couple of gear trains from the hand or the carriage, the hands that is the carriage, and driving directly from the escapement into the force wheel into the movement. So less gear, less weight, and I believe because there's less weight on that carriage, they could also make way with the huge mainspring that was in the original Freak in the bottom to drive all this, because it's lighter, right?
Now, you mentioned the fourth wheel is visible through here, which would traditionally have the seconds hand attached to it. Which is, of course, absent here, but it's kind of a proof of life that you can see that it's working underneath the more obvious balance spinning there. So, yeah, I feel like this is a very approachable, and I think I use the word distillation of the Freak and what the Freak is and what it means. But it's one that you could wear every day, and it's comfortable. And it also kind of skirts into that exotic territory a little bit. You know, when I look at this, I can't help but think of other high-end independent brands like the MB&Fs of the world and things like that bring some of the more dramatic elements of the movement onto the dial, which we have here. And there's just movement. It's cool to look at. It's fun to look at, right? Is this an exotic watch?
It's totally exotic, and it's wearable. Because I could question the other Freaks being water resistant no matter where you go.
Sure.
With all the systems, right?
Yeah.
Where this, I'm comfortable. Like if I go into tropical weather, my watch will be very happy in there. So for instance, if I'm lucky enough to have two versions, I know which one I take for travel, and I know which one I just keep, and pull out one when I want to just use it sporadically, because it packs a lot of features, right? So this watch, to me, probably gonna have a lot of adapters because it keeps the root, the core, and makes it even extremely portable. Also the fact that you have, this is a titanium version, so very light.
Yeah, it's very light,
Warms up very quickly to your wrists. I believe there's also the carbonium version, which probably even slightly lighter to it. It has this very specific texture to it. Yeah. It's a very smart product, I will say.
All right.
Or version of the Freak.
Well, in closing, is there, as a watchmaker, is this concept, how would you build on this concept? Is there anything you would change about this, or what would your approach be to achieve this effect?
Good question. I mean, this concept has been around for quite a bit. I think the vision that was initiated with the Freak, pretty much every other watchmaker's dream to have come up with this.
Really? Okay.
It kind of all makes sense. You just need to figure out how to achieve it, to make it. So mechanically, I think this watch is very mature in many ways. I don't think there's too much to be done. What personally I would like to see is perhaps trying to slim it down even further.
Okay.
To find ways to
Thin
work
watches
this.
are certainly like a thing right now, right? There's these competitions.
I personally like them.
You like this? You like this?
I like
Okay.
because going thinner is also a complication to me. It's the thinner you go, the harder it is to make the watch.
Yeah, to manufacture.
I would like to see perhaps a frick that is a bit more compact, perhaps makes way with the automatic system.
Love it.
Hint.
Okay. Yeah.
I personally like a good hand-worn watch. And also, and this is more for me, in my taste, one of the things of the frick that I think stops me from really embracing completely, aesthetically speaking, is the shape of the hand.
The shape of the hands, okay.
The display of time. And I understand the concept is that this is the carriage, but I'd like to see perhaps play with different shapes, different ways to show your minutes and hour. For instance, I think the last frick, the Frick S, had the hour as an indicator that was spinning around and the outskirt of the dial.
Yeah.
So that's, no,
Yeah, that's
maybe it's
interesting.
already
Okay.
going this way, who knows?
Yeah, this has, okay, I could see that. Maybe room for more exploration here, more creativity. It's certainly interesting what they've done here, and I of course applaud the Ulysse Nardin for what they've done with this watch. I think it's really beautiful, and like all things considered, a pretty good, compelling price point. For a watch, much less than a Debutune or an MB&F or something that kind of gets a similar vibe, and it's genuinely horologically interesting.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a very strong offer, I believe.
All right. Well, we have a lot more on this watch on Worn and Wound, now live. You can check that out. We'll leave a link below. Vincent, thank you so much for taking the time to help us make sense of this watch.
Blake, pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Right, hopefully we'll hear from you again and see you again soon. That is Ulysse Nardin Freak X. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. It helps us out a lot. And until next time, take care.
Bye.